Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Path 11 podcast today. We have a great show for you today. I would like to introduce John Perkins. Many of you might have heard of him before. We are going to be talking about Touching the Jaguar, transforming fear into action to change your life and the world. So if you haven't heard of John Perkins before, let me tell you a little bit about him. He is an activist and author of 10 books on global intrigue, shamanism, and transformation, including the classic Confessions of an Economic Hitman, which has been New York Times bestseller for more than 70 weeks, sold over 2 million copies, and published in 35 languages. He was formerly chief economist at a major consulting firm where he advised financial institutions, corporations, and governments around the world. He is a founder of the Pachamama Alliance and Dream Change, nonprofits that partner with indigenous people to protect environments and build sustainable economies. So a shaman had once told John about what it meant to touch the jaguar. So we're going to be talking quite a bit about this throughout our conversation today. And the Amazonian shaman told John, touching the jaguar means that you can identify your fears and barriers, confront them, alter your perceptions about them, accept their energy, and take actions to change yourself and the world. And really, touching the jaguar, that's what it's all about. John Perkins, welcome to the Path 11 podcast today.
Thank you, April. Thank you so much. And I just want you to know I brought my own jaguar along here with me. She's a little wild this morning, a little kitten. She's very, very sweet, but she's also very like a jaguar.
Yes, so she's going to co-host with me. How about that? And let the audience know her name again.
Jaguita.
Jaguita.
Spanish for a little jaguar. Or we just call it Jaggy.
Jaggy, I love it. I love it. I love it. And I also love the shirt that you're wearing. Like I said, I should have worn I have this lion shirt that is very colorful like that. And we could have been twinning a little bit with our power animals here. So John, first of all, I have to start off with a confession. I had never heard of you before, and I probably shouldn't have said that, but I have to be authentic. And I almost passed, if you can believe it, on this interview. And the other producer, Mike, had said, hey, that's so cool that we got John Perkins. And I said, oh, really? You want me to say yes to this interview? Because I was like, an economic hitman, like, what does that have to do with kind of what we're talking about? And then the light went on when I started to go in deeper into your work and understanding about your mission and how some of the stuff that you have been doing, early on in your career, and you talk in the book that you're kind of making it your mission to turn around some of the damage that has been done when you were this economic hitman. And, I came to learn that you're connected to shamanism and the spiritual world, which is a lot of what the Path 11 podcast is all about. So once I actually sat down and understood, and I was like, okay, yeah, this is perfect material for the Path 11 podcast. So I was not one of the 2 million people that bought your first book, but I have become a huge fan of you now. So I'm so glad that, I'm being introduced to you. And it kind of made me think a little bit too. I'm 43 and I don't know how I haven't heard of you before, but I haven't. So it made me think, well, I also don't want to assume that people in our audience and who follow the Path 11 podcast are familiar with your work. I'm sure many are, but there might be some people naive like me who just for some reason or another, our paths haven't crossed, but they're crossing now. And I do believe that there's a reason, when the student is ready, the teacher will come, type of thing. So I do want to give a little bit more. I want you to go into a little bit more about your background for people who might be learning about you for the very first time, like I was about a month ago. So can we kind of begin there like a traditional interview, but I don't want to pass over some of that before we get into this book.
Sure, April. Yeah, that's, a lot of people have never heard of me. and a surprising number have, which is interesting. And it's often the case, people don't know my name, but if the book, The Confessions of an Economic Hitman is mentioned, then they do. And she's just determined to be part of this.
I love it. I love it.
In any case, back in the 90s, 1990s, I wrote 5 books on shamanism, Shapeshifting, The World is As You Dream It. You were pretty young in those days, so you might not have heard of them.
I was still in high school.
Yeah, there you go. And then later I wrote Confessions of an Economic Hitman and 3 other books on global economics and intrigue. It's been so interesting to me that I speak at a lot of big venues and all over the world. And when I'm speaking at economic conferences, people will come up to me and say, "Hey, you're not that same guy that wrote those woo-woo books on communism, are you?" And then I'll speak at a New Age event, a shamanic event, or whatever, and people say, "You're not that guy that wrote about that awful life as an economic hitman, are you?" And for me, there was always a very, very strong connection between the two, because both worlds are based on the idea that our perceptions mold our reality, which is a major theme in the new book, Touching the Jaguar. And Touching the Jaguar is Touching the Jaguar is an overt attempt to build a bridge between these two genres that to me have always been connected. And the connection is this idea that whenever the shaman told me back in 1968, when my life was saved by a shaman in the Amazon, he taught me that touching the jaguar means that we identify the things that hold us back, our fears, the voices in us that say, "Hey, you're not good enough, you can't do that," or you don't speak the right language, or you haven't gone to enough school, or whatever it is, some voice that tells us we just can't do it, some blockage, or maybe it's us saying something about our physical ability, something. And the shaman said, when you identify those things that stop you, that they're like jaguars. And if you run from them, if you deny them, if you continue to listen to them and let them stop you, they'll keep stopping you. You won't go where you want to go in life. But if you reach out and touch them, then they give you the energy or the creativity, the courage, the patience, whatever it is that you need in order to move forward and do what you need to do. So Touching the Jaguar is really about identifying our blockages, touching them, and yeah, touch this jaguar. She's teething, so she's going after me. No, wait. And so it's about identifying the things that hold us back, confronting them, and then moving forward. And that's true. So shamans teach us that, but it's also true that what it's really about is that our perceptions mold our reality. So when we touch the jaguar, we change our perceptions, and then we can move forward and take the actions that we need in order to do what we really know we must do. So in all these cases, it's about perceptions molding reality. If you look at the business world, when you think about it, there's no corporations, there's no religion, there's no culture, there are no countries, there's no human institutions until we first perceive them. And when enough people accept a perception or codify it into law, it has a huge impact on reality. And that's the basis for modern psychotherapy, it's the basis for shamanism, it's the basis for quantum physics, and it's the basis for marketing, for corporations, for public relations, for politics, for everything. And so, this idea of touching the jaguar, and incidentally, I like the subtitle to the book is Transforming Fear into Action to Change Your Life and the World. And so, we're at a time right now where we understand that we must change the way we're living. The oceans are rising, the glaciers are melting. All of our current problems, whether it's coronavirus, or the climate change problems, or racial integration problems, police brutality problems, COVID-19 problems, all of these problems are problems, but they're not the problem. The problem is that we've created a system that's just not working, what economists call a death economy, one that's consuming itself into extinction. And it's just based on a perception that we must maximize short-term materialistic consumption, short-term profits for corporations, short-term consumption for individuals, regardless of the social and environmental cost. We have to change that perception, and then we change the world that we're living in. And we're getting all kinds of messages that we need to do that. As you well know, as your program is so much about that whole subject.
Right. Yeah. And so how do you do that collectively, right? Does there have to be a collective consciousness then that is all perceiving this other reality in order for that reality to begin to transform? Or is it just the people that are changing their perceptions to see it, then they're kind of living in that reality and maybe not as the collective?
Well, there's a collective reality that needs to change, and that is to change the idea that we need to maximize short-term materialistic consumption. Change that to a perception that success means that we benefit long term, and so it's the change from short-term maximization of profits to long-term maximization of benefits for humans, for people, and for nature, for all. And when you think about it, and this is part of where the tie comes in here, that the indigenous people that I wrote about in those first 5 books, and I still, every year, I take groups of people to visit shamans in several different countries in Latin America. You can go to johnperkins.org and find out more. But so I still am very connected with that shamanic world, very connected. And I'm also very connected with the business world. And so we see that, it's just about changing that perception. And that indigenous cultures have always had a long-term view. When we talk about the 7th generation, the cultures I know don't necessarily look out 7 generations, but they do look out for their children and their grandchildren and their great-grandchildren. And when you think about it, April, all of us come from those cultures. For the 250,000 or so years that we've been humans, as we know ourselves to be humans on this planet, most all of that time, we've lived in cultures that look to the long term, that have a goal of leaving for their children as good a world as they inherited or a better one. And it's only been within the last blink of an eye, historically speaking, that we've moved into this very selfish, very short-term view of success. And it did bring us some amazing things as short-term, amazing science, technology, medicine, art. The fact that we can have this conversation, across continents is incredible. But it's reached a limit, and we know that we're getting messages all over that we've reached the limit. And COVID-19 has really very much kicked us in the butt with this. It's global. We're seeing, everybody's seen these images of China before the virus and all the pollution, and after the virus when there's a lot less pollution. So this virus is giving us a global message that we know we can change and we must change.
Yeah. And, when you were talking about when you're at the conference, with like shamans, and then, you're at the economic conferences stuff, and they're like, oh, you're writing about that woo-woo stuff. I kind of feel too that a lot of like the Eastern traditions and indigenous cultures, I feel like that there's like pockets, many more pockets of this in the Western world, right? That you're hearing of more people getting trainings, and we're holding more of these ceremonies, and people are yearning for that, I feel like in the West. And also with COVID, I kind of am also seeing how it's stopping people to take a look at all different types of modalities. And I kind of am feeling like this energy coming, more where it's being more integrated in the Western culture, as opposed to we were so focused on like, I kind of feel like third chakra, ego, power, money, I, and, disregarding the earth and disregarding our natural resources. And now, whatever is kind of happening with this energetic shift, I'm almost feeling like as the world itself, everyone, this collective is experiencing this, that more of this healing nature and being more one with the earth, and that these ceremonies is no longer becoming woo-woo, but now you have people like looking to some of this, like, okay, maybe I should be taking zinc and vitamin C, and, looking at the way that plants can heal and help our immune system, and people are starting to get healthier and looking at different ways to take care of themselves. And we're seeing these effects of, pollution and the earth like thriving with us stopping. So, what are some of your thoughts about that, about these, I look at them as a little bit of like two separate worlds, but they're starting really to merge together, where this isn't going to be so odd to talk about.
Yes, there's many prophecies, and you may know the prophecy of the condor and the eagle, where it's about these two aspects of culture coming together. It's really about the mind and the heart coming together, and so on. So there's so many prophecies of this, and it's interesting to me that let's see, I started taking people to study with, to live with, to spend a little time with the shamans deep in the Amazon and high in the Andes Mountains in the late 1980s. And I have to say that throughout much of the 90s, the people that were interested in going on these adventures and learning from the shamans who wanted to teach us were, people that were very interested in the books on shamanism, the New Age type of people, what my corporate friends might refer to as woo-woo. And now, but those people, they've changed a lot in many respects. They still come, but also I get a lot of high-up corporate executives, medical doctors, scientists, all kinds of people now are interested in going into the Amazon. And every year I take people to the Kogi of Colombia, to the Achua and Zapata and Shuar of the Amazon, and to the Mayan people of Central America. I have 3 or 4 different trips that I take people on. And, the spectrum is very broad of the people that want to go on these trips now. And that's changed a lot over the years.
Yeah.
And, and again, for what you're saying, I'm very struck by one of the shamans I take people to is a wonderful woman shaman high in the Andes Mountains of Ecuador. She has the great name of Maria Juana. Maria Juana Yamberla. And several years ago when I was there with a group and I was translating, and somebody asked, so Maria Juana, what do we do to save the earth? And she just laughed, and she said, Mother Earth, Pachamama is not in danger. We are, we people, and a lot of other species we'll take with us. But we're just like so many fleas. And if we get to be too much of a nuisance, Pachamama will just shake us off. And then Maria Juana pointed up at this massive volcano that hovers over her home in the Andes, Imbabura. And she said, a few years ago, that volcano was covered with a massive ice cap. It isn't anymore. Pachamama is twitching. She hasn't shaken us off yet, but she's letting us know that we better change. And she looked at us, she smiled, she said, all of you should be so happy that you're alive right now because you're living at a time that's been prophesized. You're living at a time where we really can listen to the earth. We know we can listen to the earth. And she's speaking. And April, I have to say that since then, every time there's been a major hurricane or the fires in California or Australia or earthquakes or whatever, these once in 100-year events that happen every year or so now, every time there's one of those, I thought about what Maria Juana said. But the problem was that we looked at those as local. Most people looked at those as local events. They might have been talking about, oh, this is part of climate change. But in general, people thought, well, if I survive the hurricane or whatever, the outside world will come to my rescue soon. I'll get water, bottled water, and food, and then we can rebuild the old way. And we looked at it that way, pretty much. The coronavirus now is no longer that. It's global. It said, look, you guys, you weren't listening, and so you better listen. So here's a real kick in the butt. This is impacting everybody on the planet, even people deep in the Amazon. And it's forcing us to really look at what we haven't looked at. There is no outside world that's going to come to our rescue. We're getting the message that we live on a very fragile space station, the Earth, and we humans are the pilots, and we've been navigating the space station toward disaster. It's time to reboot the navigation system. It's time for us to alter the course and move away from this death economy, this overall global economic, governmental, social system that we've created that really is destroying itself, and move to a life economy. And we can talk more about that if you want, but that's the kind of economic system that we are moving toward, and it's begun. It began before the virus. B corporations, benefit corporations, the Green New Deal, conscious capitalism. There were so many signs that we were already on the path toward change. And my hope is that this virus truly will kick us into a jumpstart that we totally globally will understand. We don't want to return to normal. And if we do, we'll just get to the old normal. And if we do, we'll just get kicked in the butt again. We need to create a new normal, which is the life economy and a wonderful world. This is not about suffering. This is not sacrificing. This is about moving forward into something truly elegant and much more spiritual, in fact.
Yeah, I would love to talk more about that because I haven't talked to anybody about that. You're the first person that I'm talking to about this life economy. So explain that a little bit more. How do you see this, after COVID-19 changing? Do you see stuff changing in the health system? What do you think about the economy and what does that mean, life economy?
Yeah, so I'm an economist by training, although I don't really claim to be one anymore. But I was chief economist, which is at one point being an economic hitman. I felt guilty about it, but I came to realize that it also has given me a lot of credibility in the business world because I have that background and can speak to these things. And more what I'm talking about is how this death economy that we've created is very short term, and it means because it's based on the idea that businesses must maximize short-term profits regardless of the social and environmental costs. It gives CEOs the right, in fact, a mandate to do whatever it takes to maximize short-term profits. And that means destroying the resources in the short term upon which their long-term depends. It means destroying the environment. It means exploiting people as much as possible, paying them as little as possible, exploiting resources. It means corrupting politicians. It means changing the law so that, in fact, corrupting politicians is no longer legally a form of corruption. It's now legally acceptable. All of these things. And it's not working. And most all of the executives that I know understand it's not working, but they don't know how to change it because they're afraid that if a CEO goes deeper into making these changes, he may lose half a percentage of market share. And if that happens, the main stockholders will fire him and replace him with someone who only cares about market share. And so, these executives will tell me, hey, get out there and tell all the audience you speak to send us letters, send us emails, send us tweets, whatever it is they want to do. When I get 100,000 of these things that say, I love your product, Nike, let's just say. I love your product. I love your tennis shoes. But I'm not going to buy them anymore until you pay your workers in Indonesia a fair salary. And when these executives get enough of these letters, they can take them to their boards, and they can take them to their main stockholders and say, hey, we got to listen to our customers. And so there is this whole thing that we just need to let these people know that we've got to move into a new perception of what it means to be successful. And the life economy is that success. And the life economy is an economic system that cleans up pollution, pays people to clean up pollution, pays investors to invest in things like processes or equipment that mine all the plastic in the oceans, that clean up all the oil that's spilled around gas stations and oil drilling sites all over the world, that pays people and investors to do things that regenerate destroyed environments, clean up rivers around the world and harbors and oceans and old mine pits and so on and so forth. There's so much that can be done, and pays people to come up with new ways of recycling and new technologies that will make today's solar and wind, which I'm totally in favor of, but it will make our technologies today look archaic 5 years from now, where we can move into using the air itself to create energy. There's just so much that can be done. And, this COVID-19 has shown us that we are capable of making changes. I'm not doing a book tour that I should be doing right now at the bookstores. I was supposed to be at one in Miami, one in Chicago, one in New York last week. Instead, we did them virtually. And that meant we were also able to reach people who visited those bookstores over the years and signed in and now live in Sweden or Switzerland or Italy or Spain. Those people were able to to come to the bookstore top, and nobody had to fly in airplanes, including me. So we're learning that we can change, and that change can actually be fun and beneficial. And I'm not trying to downplay the suffering that people are going through or the stress of self-isolation, that all of that's there, but it's also teaching us that we can move through those kinds of things, and we can move into a life economy. And it's a beautiful thing. I mean, I think if you think about it, what if we were to pay? So if you're an American citizen, about $54 of every 100 you pay in taxes to the U.S. government, and the discretionary budget goes to the military. $54 out of every 100 goes to some form in the military budget. Whew, imagine if some of that money instead went to pay those same companies, Raytheon, General Dynamics, to instead of making missiles and tanks, to make equipment that cleans up the plastic that's in the oceans, that mines all the oil that's leaked around the world and pipelines and so on and so forth. And engineers that I know work for those companies would be much happier designing systems that do that. As long as they're paid to build missiles and tanks, they do it. But they'd be happier to be paid to do things that will make the world a better place for their children and grandchildren, most of them.
Yeah. And when you're talking about these technologies too, are you also talking about like advancement in artificial intelligence and how this is going to challenge the minds of maybe great inventors and other people to come up with these solutions?
Yes, absolutely. And I live on an island off the coast of Seattle, and Seattle's kind of a hotbed of new technology. A lot of the big tech companies are located here, and I have a lot of friends that are in that business, and my neighbors, and they've been to the Amazon with me. Some brilliant minds in that field, and really, really exploring how, if you think about it, artificial intelligence. It doesn't have the emotions that we humans have. It doesn't deal with political issues unless it's designed to. And so the important thing is, how do you design it so that it'll be objective? So if we can really design artificial intelligence in a way that'll be objective, where we can actually look at it as the next evolution, perhaps, in human involvement, but to be objective. Now, a lot of your listeners are going to say, yeah, but it's going to be taken over by, and there'll be all kinds of conspiracy theories around that, which absolutely could happen. I'm not denying that could happen. But so these people that I know are working on how do we make sure, using blockchain and other methods that keep things transparent and honest, how do we help that technology be objective? So it could be almost like an extraterrestrial looking down on us, but it's actually our own AI that says, hey, you can't go on like this any longer. You can't continue to pollute your waters and your air and your land and your minds. You can't continue to colonize the world in your own minds. You've got to understand that what you're doing is extremely destructive ultimately, and then comes up with suggested ways to change that. So I think there can be a lot of hope there of some sort of a mind that we create as part of us, that is not judgmental, is not politically motivated, that is truly motivated to analyze the situation and suggest solutions to the problems that we currently face. And again, I say that with the caveat of understanding that it is possible that other people who don't have those motivations could direct that intelligence toward nefarious ways. That's the challenge, is how do we make sure that doesn't happen?
Yeah, so let me ask you another question, and it's going to be a little hard for me to put it into words, and I'll do my best. And maybe this is more from, I'm asking from the shaman perspective of this. So you gave the example how you're supposed to do this book tour, and you ended up doing it virtually. And same thing with Path 11. We were supposed to be filming a conference in Chicago this year, and we figured out a way to do it online, and we did that. But the key element missing is clearly the human connection, right? Being there. Like, even though we can do this and this is wonderful, it would feel totally different if we were sitting in the same room with each other. But then I kind of stop myself and I go into the whole thought about how, maybe in some of the theories, maybe this is truly just an avatar. And I think about consciousness, and I know that energy doesn't die, and we are pure consciousness. And so I'm kind of also grappling with, is some of this virtual reality stuff and the way that we are connecting kind of taking away a little bit of the in-person connection, yet does it evolve us to understand consciousness better? That the physical body, the human body, is just kind of this vehicle that we use here on Earth, but it does feel like that there's an element that's being taken away due to the pandemic of what a lot of people are longing for, yearning for, is to hug people again and to, I would love to sit in a room with you instead of look at you over a computer. But we're consciousness and we don't need the physical body. I mean, so many things in the way that we communicate and non-verbally and telepathically, that maybe this can help us to understand that concept a little bit more. Like many of the shamans that I talk to would say, you have to, this is all a dream. You're waking up inside of the dream. You dream your dream. Yeah. And sometimes I think I get a little attached to the physical, the physical aspect of being in this vehicle. But what are your thoughts about that? Do you think that this allows us to evolve a little bit more to understand consciousness outside of the body?
Yes, I think you expressed it very eloquently there. I think it is a vehicle. It seems to me that the universe is conspiring. The earth is conspiring. Pachamama is conspiring to teach us that we can and must change. So as I travel around speaking at conferences in many places, and I was recently speaking at a conference in St. Petersburg, Russia, 12,000 pretty high-level executives and world leaders were there. Putin was there, and Guterres, Secretary General of the United Nations, and many others, and the president of all the big banks and big companies. And I was very struck by how many of those people during receptions would come up to me and say, I run a big company and I want to be greener, but I'm afraid I'll lose my job if I go too far. So get out there, get on social networking and convince people to send letters to me to turn these things around. And we can do that today because of the technologies we have in a way that we couldn't do it before. And so I do think that this is opening us up to an understanding that we can communicate with people without being in physical contact. And hopefully we'll have the opportunity to go back into physical contact too, but maybe we won't need to do it nearly as much. I'm reminded of a time a number of years ago, again, a shaman, this was again in the Andes of Ecuador, and this was a male shaman, and he said, we shamans are connected all over the world by like a spider's web. He said, if I here in Ecuador as a shaman, I tug on this web, a shaman in Africa, another shaman in Asia, they can feel me tugging on this web. They know that. And then he looked at me and he said, I think within your lifetime, John, that web is going to be expressed in a more physical way that everybody will be able to tune into. Here we are. That was before the internet, and we're tied into that web right now. I don't know how many people from how many different countries are listening to us right now, April. But I suspect, and that's phenomenal that we can do this. And people you and I would never have been in touch with before, now we can do it. And yes, I terribly miss And my grandson, who doesn't live too far from me, is just about to turn 13. He comes over. We go to play soccer or something. He wants to hug. And he says, "Oh my gosh, I forgot. I can't hide." And it's particularly the kids their age that they're a little less cautious, but he's very aware that at my age he has to be really careful of me. And it's so frustrating and sad. And so hopefully we'll get back to the time where we can do that, but hopefully we'll also have learned that we've got this whole new area that we can go into, which is energy. As you said, Einstein said matter and energy never disappear. They just shapeshift, and we're immortal. We're all immortal, and our souls and our energy is always there. It's never going to dissipate. Our bodies will dissolve, but our energy and our souls will continue. It's very shamanic. It's very indigenous. But we and so I think we're getting a glimpse of that now by being able to do this, by being in touch the way you and I and all the other people out there listening and seeing us are in touch with us right now. It's a monumental experience that we're sharing today. This COVID-19 is huge. It's bigger, I think, than any of us possibly can imagine in terms of how it's going to impact, how it is impacting and will continue to impact human evolution and consciousness evolution.
And we may not even truly understand the depths of it in our lifetime of really what's happening, what's beginning, what's transforming. And I wanted to just go back in your book too, because, towards the end, when you have resources, like what can you do? Sometimes some of these bigger concepts, I don't know about anybody else, but it can almost feel a little bit overwhelming, and you kind of feel so small in the grand picture of things. And then what is it that I can really do? How can I make a difference? And you said it today. I took that point away from your TED Talk too, where it's like, don't think that, a tweet or an email to some of these larger corporations doesn't make a difference. You said they're watching, they are listening, they are getting those, so that is something that you can do. But what I thought was really interesting, and it's back in your book, it says resources, what can you do? And you kind of go through and you ask people to ask themselves the big questions, which was also, I think, in chapter 13, when you guys were going through the ceremony with, I think it was the Lady Lynn. And like some of the bigger questions for us to be able to answer on an individual level is like, who and what am I? What are my jaguars, my fears? How do I confront my jaguars and alter my perceptions? What actions do I take for me personally? And how do I change the world? And there was the example of the daily practice. And one of the questions, I have a bunch of stuff highlighted here, I'm not sure, but it was about like asking yourself why you were born into this period of time, right? It was like, we were born, and all of us who are here experiencing this, that's a pretty significant thing to reflect on. So I was wondering if you wanted to talk a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I'd like to, April.
Because that was really striking to me. I was like, whoa, let me think about that for a second. Like, okay, yeah, I was born into this time, and it's making great history. So yes, please elaborate more.
Yeah, well, it's a very indigenous concept after the shaman saved my life by teaching me about changing perceptions and so forth in the Amazon back in 1969. Since then, I studied with shamans in all over the world, Indonesia, Iran, Egypt, all over the Americas. And so many of them will tell us that we are born at a specific time in history into the specific situation that each one of us was born into, because we have a mission in life. We all have a mission. And our own culture, April, the one I was raised in, and I suspect the one you were raised in, doesn't really emphasize that very much. We had to go out and find it. But the schools don't tell us we got missions. They tell us we got goals, get good grades, go to a good college, get a good job, so on and so forth. Those are goals. But the idea of a mission. And so it's like, so each one of us can ask ourselves, why was I born now at this amazing, amazing time in history? And I'm not, in any way diminishing the terrible suffering that a lot of people are going through, the deaths and the pain and suffering, but it is an incredible time of we're being shaken awake. The Pachamama is truly, truly beginning to shudder now. Why were you born at this time? And why were you born into the situation you were born into, the family you were born into, or however you were raised? Why did you go through what you went through? Why did I serve as an economic hitman doing some pretty bad things around the world? Why did that happen to me after I'd already studied with shamans? And how do I put all this together to now move forward with what I most want to do in life? So these are very important questions. And I love that you brought up, the book is a narrative nonfiction. I write it as stories, true stories that I think are fun to read. I hope they're fun to read because I don't write diatribes on economics. I write about economics, but I do it as a personal thing because I think people want to read stories. But in the end, there's this daily practice that can take less than 10 minutes. And you don't do it every day. You can do it once a week. But that we do regularly, and it's based on those questions that you asked. And maybe I should just run through those a little bit, give an example.
Yeah, I would love that. Yep.
Okay, so and everybody can do this. So this is based on the idea that we can all participate by convincing corporate executives to change their ways, writing emails, starting consumer movements through social networking. And I want to say that even the sociopaths, and we know there's a lot of sociopaths running corporations out there, but they're not driven by profit, they're driven by success. And if we redefine success from that perception of making a better long-term future, they will be the people who will fight hardest to make that happen. If that's the people we put as Time Magazine's Person of the Year or on the cover of Fortune magazine, it's the executives that are moving toward a life economy, then the sociopaths will buy into it big time. There was a little diversion here, but I could just hear people asking the question. You talk about CEOs, but what about the sociopaths out there? Yeah, they're there, but we can bring them around too.
Yeah, and there's psychology 101 for you, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I know some of those sociopaths, believe me.
Mm-hmm.
So the 5 questions, and I'll give some examples of how that works. Question number 1, what is it I most want to do for the rest of my life? What will bring me the greatest satisfaction? What will bring me the greatest bliss? And for me, I'd answer, I want to write. I love to write. I love to write. I just love to write. And I've got a friend who's kind of at the opposite end of the spectrum. He's a carpenter. He wants to work with his hands and wood. And so but every one of us asks that question. What do you most want to do for the rest of your life, beginning right now, tomorrow, beginning now? Second question, how does that relate to helping others? Because we're all happier if we help other people. It could be one other person, or it could be the whole world. And for me as a writer, I would say, well, I want to write books that tell stories and inspire people to change their lives, to make their lives better and to make a better world. That's what I want to do. My carpenter friend would say, well, I want to use sustainable materials. And the third question then is, what's holding you back? What are the barriers? What are the jaguars that are holding you back from doing that? What's keeping you? So as a writer, I might say, I just don't have enough time to write every day. I know as a writer, I got to write every day, but I don't have enough time to write every day. My carpenter friend might say, well, my clients are not willing to pay more money for sustainable materials. And so the fourth question is, when you touch that jaguar, when you don't run from it, when you go out and touch it, what's the message that it gives you that changes your perceptions? And so for the writer, I would say, oh, well, the jaguar tells me I could get up half an hour earlier every morning, or I could watch an hour less of television every night and write. Maybe 3 nights a week, but I can do it. I can discipline myself. That I can create time. And my carpenter friend, the jaguar, says, hey, tell your clients that the added price is not a cost. It's an investment. They're investing in the future of themselves, for their children, and for their grandchildren by using sustainable materials. It's an investment. And so the fifth question then is, what actions do I take every day? So as a writer, I write. I have to write every day, or almost every day. And my carpenter friend, he builds with sustainable materials, but he also promotes them. And he doesn't have to be an eloquent poet or write a book about it, but he finishes building a cabinet over there or a house over here, and he tells the children, look, your parents invested in this. The cabinet is made out of all sustainable materials. Your house is made out of sustainable materials. Your parents have invested in your future, just as if they were paying for your education or something else that they see as an investment. And so, if every one of us answers these 5 questions, and we do it on a fairly regular basis, daily or whatever, fairly regularly, we reach a higher consciousness about ourselves and who we are on this planet and what brings us satisfaction. And those last 3 questions, what are the jaguars I face? What happens when I touch the jaguars? How does it change my perception? What actions do I take? Those will change frequently. So as a writer, I might say, oh, yeah, so now I've got an hour. I've cut out an hour of television every night. I can write for an hour. And then the next question is, what am I going to write about? Got to touch that jaguar. And then I say, oh, I'm going to write about global economics. Well, wait, do I really have the credibility? Do I have the knowledge to write about global economics? And then when I touch the jaguar, it says, well, write about stories that relate to the global economics, like the stories about your life as an economist and with indigenous people. And so we go on. And for each of us, every day, frequently, those 3 last questions will change. But every time they change, we rise to a higher level of consciousness about ourselves and who we are on this planet, and a higher level of satisfaction about our lives. And the book describes a little daily practice that makes it easy to do that, to deal with that every day. And I think that they work for everybody. It doesn't matter whether you're a carpenter or a plumber or a teacher or a priest or a host of a big show like this or whatever you are. A parent, we can all answer those questions, and they will move us forward into making into the subtitle of the book, transforming fear into action to change your life in the world.
Yeah. And I really love the daily practice. What came up for me when I was thinking about, okay, when I start to touch my Jaguar, what's coming up? One of the things that I realize in this daily practice is sometimes behind the fear, we can make excuses as to, well, I really don't have time, right? Or where am I going to find the time? Or where am I going to find the money? Or there's no way I could afford, the better resources. I just can't do it, John. I make this amount of money and I can't get that, that type of deck that I want. But, I feel like when you talk about touching that Jaguar, there is always a way. I feel like that there's always something that we can challenge within ourselves to say, that's just not a good enough excuse not to wake up 30 minutes beforehand. If you really want it, and like you said, you really want to elevate your consciousness or be that happier person, because ultimately, like that big question, what is your purpose? What is it that you want to do in life that will make you the happiest? Many people aren't doing that. They'll say, well, I wish I could. If fear and money wasn't an issue, I would be doing this. But like you said, it's taking those steps. Each step you take then diminishes that fear and the fear of the Jaguar. And then you can kind of like see the beauty of it. So I also see it as like on a practical level too, of really beginning to challenge yourself to eliminate the excuses that are attached to the fear that's holding you back and stopping you.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And this coronavirus is a wonderful example in a way that, I sometimes talk to people and they say, well, I guess I can't self-isolate for another day. Forget about another month or 2 months or however long it's going to be. And I'll say, well, wait a minute. Didn't you tell me earlier that you wanted to learn how to play the flute? And you've got a flute, and you can go on the internet and learn how to play it. This is a great opportunity to stay home and play your flute. Or didn't you always tell me you wanted to start writing a book or reading more books or talking to your family that lives overseas? Or there's so many things that we're given that opportunity. If we just look at what the Jaguar is really telling us, so yeah. And I think we can take this to a big level. If we consider that we're going through a consciousness revolution around the world, I truly believe this, that there is this conscious revolution, and it is reflected in B corporations, the things we've talked about, that people are waking up to the fact we live on this fragile space station. Whenever there's a revolution, there's a pushback. The status quo doesn't want the revolution to happen. That's always been true throughout history. But if they're revolutionaries, or if we want to think of ourselves more as agents of change than actual revolutionaries, but if we take energy from that, we say, look, those people who are telling us that we can't change, that we got to go back to the old normal, they're scared. And they're scared because they know that we're winning, and they know that we can't go back to normal. We've got to create a new normal. If we take energy from that, kind of like a martial artist, it's hot. If you're up against someone who's a lot bigger and stronger than you, don't try to outpower them. Use their energy to your advantage. And I think we're very, very much at a time like that now, and our consciousness is rising. There's been a huge shadow side of humanity, and especially the United States, I think, that's been shown by this virus. And what's a shadow? Well, a shadow is created when a light shines on a solid object. In this case, a solid object is a death economy. And the light shining on it's created this big shadow out here. And so how do you get rid of a shadow? Well, you raise the light. And as you raise the light, the shadow diminishes, it diminishes and it starts to go away. It goes away eventually. Well, this is raising consciousness. And as we're raising consciousness, the shadow of what we've created as human beings and this death economy and the system that just is no longer working, that shadow is diminishing. But you have to see the shadow first to know how to raise the light. And it's become very obvious. This is such a very special time, April. I think we all ought to feel blessed that we're alive now at this time that's been prophesized by so many cultures, and we're in it, and we're all part of it.
Yeah, I agree, John. And I think, too, what you just said, giving the martial artist example, too, for people is to not maybe fight against what is happening and to release the resistance. How do you make this work for you? and how do you work with it? How do you lean into it and not look at this as such a horrible time, but really, like you said in the very beginning, to change the perception, you change your reality.
Yes. Yeah. And that's all it takes, really. And it's so easy when you think about it. All we got to do is change our perception as individuals of what we want to do and what's getting in our way, and how we change our perceptions to move us forward. And as a species, how do we change the perception of what it means to be human on this planet? It's pretty easy to change perceptions. Then, of course, we got to take actions. You got to actually do it. So my perception is I want to be a writer, and I create the time to write. Then I've actually also got to be disciplined enough to sit down and write. And sometimes I've got to overcome a barrier there too. Like, oh my gosh, I got a headache this morning. I don't feel like writing. But maybe if I do a little writing, it'll help me get rid of my headache.
Right. Wonderful. Well, John, thank you so much for coming on the Path 11 podcast. I'm so glad that I finally learned about you and your work. And, for listeners who are just being introduced to you for the first time, where can they find more information about you, your website, your books, all of that stuff?
Yeah. My website is johnperkins.org. I'm organic. I'm not a comic. And the book, this book has basically so much from all the other 9 books I wrote before it in it. But you can get it through the website, and at the website you can order it from your local bookstore. You can also join a great little private Facebook group where we've now got quite a few people on there, and we have guests. A couple of weeks ago, we had 3 shamans from Guatemala. Mayan shamans. Oops.
She knows it's time to go, right? She's saying goodbye to me. Oh, I think we might have lost your sound. I think the kitty cat muted you.
Oh, sorry. She did.
There we go. That's okay.
I had to touch that, Jaguar. So johnperkins.org. And we've got a great little Facebook group that's now got quite a few people on it. And every couple of weeks, we do a special program. We recently had 3 shamans from Central America, Mayan shamans, who did a fire ceremony. And if you missed it, you can still get it on video. So johnperkins.org. I think it's on the screen right now. So, yeah. And I'd love to have people. I'm planning on going back to Central America to the Mayan shamans in January. I think that trip's going to happen. We postponed 2 others this year to 2 other indigenous groups, but we'll be resuming them, I'm sure. Love to have some of your people join us. April, I'd love to have you join us. Please.
I know.
Please one of these trips. It's so much fun and so inspirational and informative. And it's this exchange between us and the indigenous shamans. And they're very, very authentic. People I've known and worked with, many of them since the late 60s, the 70s, the 80s, for a long, long time.
I would love to join. And I think if there's anything that COVID, taught me, is just to continue to keep living life to the fullest and do more travel. I've thought a lot about travel. I've never been out there to the Amazon. The more people that I have had the opportunity to interview for the Path 11 podcast, I was like, okay, I'm ready to maybe try ayahuasca. I'm maybe ready to go and do some of this deep, work. So that kind of settling me is charging me. Like, once you say go, I'm going for it. So yes, I would love to. So I'll be following your work from here on out.
Great. Well, thank you. And thank you so much for all you do. Your program is wonderful. You're doing great work. You're changing consciousness, and that's so helping people to change their consciousness. And that's so important. And I so appreciate what you're doing. Thank you for what you
thank
do.
You too. Thank you so much. We'll have a great day, and give that kitty cat some more hugs and kisses for me. she's a beauty.
Yeah, she's dying to play now. She said, all right, enough of the seriousness. It's time to play.
That's right. All right. Well, I'll let you and your little girl get back to playing. All right. Take care.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.